And welcome to the first installment of the Five-Star Podcast of Wrestling. I'm host Sean Meyers, and I'm joined by co-host today, Sean Saputo. Sean, welcome in. Want to give a little bit of background for this show because this is the first of what hopefully will be many editions of this video podcast. And I kind of came up with the idea a couple weeks ago talking to you and a couple other guys that we all have broadcasting backgrounds. We do high school sports, but we're also big professional wrestling fans, and I thought it was natural to kind of transition into pro wrestling talk. I know it's something you and I have discussed many times over the years, so we get to do it a little bit more formally here. So just give a quick background on, I guess, your origins as a wrestling fan and how you became to be the fan you are now.
Really, it just started as a young kid, something my dad grew up watching, and he brought me into the world of wrestling. And I can go back to remembering back to 1997-ish. First time I went to a show was at the Palumbo Center for WCW. And since I was a little kid, it's been something I followed, and I've never really taken a step away from it. I've always kept up with it, and it's, I don't know, I guess a lot of people call it the male version of a soap opera, but it's something that's interactive. It keeps your mind rolling because of how it's changed so drastically and so quick, but it's been something since I was a little kid that I've always enjoyed, and I probably will always enjoy it.
Now, you had mentioned that you actually saw WCW initially, so you kind of got into it when there was the Monday Night Wars, and it was a big competition between the two companies, and then ECW was prominent at that time as well. Have you always been a WWE guy, or how did that sort of work out?
See, back in the day when I was a kid, I really didn't have that one that I was most loyal to. If you go back to those days in the Monday Night Wars, I was such a huge Goldberg fan back in the day. NWO, the Wolfpack, I liked all of them. But then on the flip side, if you flip to the WWE, you have your Stone Cold, you have your Rocks, and all those guys back in the 90s. And I really didn't stay loyal to one. I would sit at my house on Monday nights with my dad, and we would flip back and forth between WCW and WWE, catching up on both of them.
So that brings us to today, and I'll get into my background quickly, but are you pretty much just a WWE product guy, whether it be the main roster or their NXT or 205, or do you really focus on all sorts of different styles?
See, I've over the years, at least in the last 5 years, I've started to follow New Japan a little bit more. ROH, I'll catch here and there. TNA was something in the mid-2000s I was really into, with AJ Styles, Christopher Daniels, Samoa Joe, Abyss in his prime, Bobby Roode, James Storm. The whole Beer Money Inc. was one of my favorite things back in TNA days. But, TNA really tapered off to me, and it's been something I've struggled to kind of keep track on. But WWE is the main product I watch, and then my number two would have to be New Japan.
So you're mid-20s, right? About 23 or so?
24, yeah.
24, okay. So I got almost 10 years on you. I started watching in 1990 is the first year that I remember. I was 6 years old at the time. And then WWF, obviously WWE now, was the main promotion. And WCW was prominent, but not on the same level. And then about 5 years later, that sort of changed where they had a lot of money into it and, sort of drew even and then surpassed WWF. I was always a WWF guy. That was my number one. Even when they were losing consistently, I always was loyal to them. And I actually, as a result, sort of had animosity towards WCW. I never really watched it. I would watch it during commercial breaks. I never watched it in place of WWF. And I actually sort of preferred ECW as the number two option just because it was an alternative that was, I think, a little bit more close to WWF at the time. I know they had somewhat of a relationship, but I felt like WCW was sort of the one that stood apart in a negative way for me. But since the other promotions, those two that we alluded to, disappeared, I've pretty much been WWE, and I do watch Ring of Honor every week. I would like to go to a show sometime, but I really don't get into stuff outside of that. I'll watch every SmackDown, every Raw. I watch 205, which I'm in the minority on that. I watch NXT. I watch Total Divas. But when it comes to the other promotions, like I said, Ring of Honor, I'll catch on TV, but that's about the extent of it.
Telling you, man, you got to start catching up on New Japan.
So we're talking WWE now, and the interesting thing that I want to talk about is it's the busiest time of year. It's WrestleMania season. Really, you can look back to the Royal Rumble and say that's the start, and it carries us up until next Sunday, which is the biggest payoff of the whole year. In years past, I felt like by the time the Royal Rumble ended, you kind of had an idea of at least 50%, if not more, of what the WrestleMania matches would be, and there was a lot of anticipation. Now, you still had one, maybe two pay-per-views in between to sort out some of the details, but usually you had a pretty good idea. I did not feel that was the case this year, where it seemed like they did not have a long-term plan for a lot of stuff. Roman and Brock, I think a lot of people realized that would happen. Undertaker and Cena has been on and off. Obviously, it looks like that will happen. But a lot of the other things, I don't think that maybe there wasn't a clear plan in place. So do you look at that unpredictability as something that's a positive because it forces the fans to tune in every week and they can't predict it months in advance? Or do you look at it as not having the proper build?
I would say I think in recent memory this might be the worst planned WrestleMania over time, despite the fact that there are so many marquee matchups that are going to take place. I think creative got way too flustered with a couple of the injuries that happened in storylines that were going to be planned, and they had to flip the script real quick, and I think it caused for them to kind of try to focus on the main marquee matchups more so than building the lesser ones. I've never gone a time where it still a week, we're less than a little over a week away, and there's still some slight planning that needs to be done. And I think Raw has done a better job in building its matches for WrestleMania. I think SmackDown has done a terrible job, personally. But I think for some it can add the intrigue, but you like to kind of know, because especially with WrestleMania, it being how important it is to all the fans, it's something that if you're going to it, when you're spending the amount of money that it costs to go to WrestleMania to begin with, you kind of want to know what you're getting yourself into. But then if a card comes out that is just kind of plain, it's like, wow, why am I spending $1,500, $2,000? Especially for those out of the country who are spending way more that come to WrestleMania, for there to be poor build and then it ends up being a mediocre show. I mean, we've had some mediocre WrestleManias in recent memory, to be honest.
I think what you said is sort of accurate in that when I look at WrestleMania, I want it to be matches that are months in the making, that people know that's going to be the biggest match of the year, and not something where they get 3 weeks of build that looks just the same as any other pay-per-view build.
Yeah.
With Roman and Lesnar, people kind of begrudgingly accepted that was probably going to be the Universal title match.
Yeah. That was a year play in advance.
That's one that I'm sort of split on, because I am a Roman fan, but I understand that putting him in a main event as the face is almost always going to have negative consequences with the audience, especially a WrestleMania audience. Mm-hmm. The problem is Lesnar's been the champion for a year. He's wrestled 4-5 matches on TV, and one of those against AJ was not even for his title. So it's to the point now where you need someone else to take the title off of him for it to mean anything whatsoever to Raw. They've basically not had a title for a year straight. And even before that, Goldberg was champion for a 6-week period or so. So you're looking at not having a permanent champion for 14 months. That's not good for the brand. Roman is the guy that probably should take the title, but when you set up the match with Lesnar potentially on his way out, Roman is a guy that is just not getting over as a face, despite having great matches and being a guy that should be a champion. It just seems like that, despite having a pretty decent build, and I like some of the stuff that they did with getting Vince involved, having Lesnar no-show, whether or not that was the original plan or if they sort of just kind of went with what happened in reality there. But it seems like the build's good, but when you get to the actual show, there could be some issues with how the fans accept it.
I think it was the best built match so far, just simply because WWE, you had to take a stance on the fact that Brock is looking at going back to the UFC. And I think they did a great job in finding a way to make Brock an even bigger heel and turn the fans against him and really try to force the issue onto proving that Roman Reigns is a guy that is dedicated to this company and is willing to do what he has to do to, carry the company in the future. And I think, and really, I just think people don't know what to do with Roman Reigns in terms of liking him or not, because I was watching the other night and Kurt Angle came out and said, well, Roman Reigns isn't going to be here, and everybody cheered. And then they were like, and then they said something else, and then they were cheering about Roman Reigns. And then he came out and was getting booed, and then he started beating up Lesnar a little bit, and then they cheered him, and then he hit a Superman punch and booed him, and then he got destroyed, and they cheered, and then Brock came back and flipped him off the gurney, and then everybody was booing Brock. It made no sense. Nobody knows what they want, whether they want to cheer for Roman or not, but I think this was the way they had to build this match, and I think down the line there is going to be an eventual heel turn on Roman Reigns. I think it's the only way to make this succeed. If they put the title on him as a face and he comes out on Monday Night Raw after Mania and says, I told you so, I don't need you people, it's all me, then perfect completion to that build, I think.
Do you think that's something they'll ever do? Because it seemed like Reigns is where Cena was 5 years ago, where everyone's talking about that would be the best for the company and for him. Because right now, people don't like him, but it's not because he's not a likable person. It's because they chose him 3 or 4 years ago, and fans are still holding that against him because they didn't have a say in that choice. The company made that decision for him.
Well, it's all lineage, too. It's not so much that it's just, we're picking this guy to come in. He also has that past lineage with being cousins with The Rock and being a part of the whole NOI family and all that stuff.
You mentioned The Rock.
Yeah.
The Rock, when he debuted, was a face that no one liked, and he was hated. And he got over because they turned him heel and allowed him to rip into everyone. Now, that was earlier in his career as opposed to where Roman's at now. But let's say Roman wins the title from Lesnar. Lesnar, whether he comes or goes, probably won't be around at least for the next couple of months. Can they succeed with Roman as a face champion, or is it just going to be the same result that we've seen a couple times already with him?
Well, sadly, I think they're going to keep him as a face champion. I think it can succeed, but you have to have the correct matchups. You can't throw him in, which I've heard they're going to restart a feud with Samoa Joe when Samoa Joe becomes healthy, and have him and Roman feud probably over the title. And I think that just kills all momentum you're trying to gain as having Roman as a face champion, just because you have so many people that are Samoa Joe fans that are gonna, and he's supposed to be the heel, and then fans are going to cheer for Samoa Joe, and it completely construes the situation. So I don't think it's going to work if Roman Reigns stays heel or stays face. I think he has to turn heel for this to work in the long run if they plan on having a steady champion there night in, night out defending the title.
Let's talk about SmackDown a little bit. I know you are not a fan of how they built up their storylines. So the one that sort of has paralleled the Raw Universal title is the WWE Championship, AJ Styles, who when he won the title, I think a lot of people thought this might ultimately be his WrestleMania opponent in Nakamura, who won the Royal Rumble. Now, I know a ton of people are Nakamura fans from, as you said, what he did in New Japan. Yep. To me, he has been significantly below his ability on the main roster as opposed to what he did especially in NXT, where he was in North America, and the WWE fans under that umbrella of NXT saw what he could do. So my question is, has the build been good enough to justify having Nakamura in this match, or do you think there was a better possible scenario for what they could have done for the SmackDown title all along?
I think this is the best case scenario because this is the match that everybody wants to see, just simply because what these two put on together in New Japan was fantastic work. And my gripe with the build is it's so difficult to build a match between two faces. It's not like you're going to turn AJ Styles heel because he's going to go to Raw as a face anyways, I believe, when the draft comes. And Nakamura is going to be the champion for at least probably the next 4 to 6 months, I think, after WrestleMania, because I'm going to say he's going to go down as the quote-unquote first Japanese champion, even though they kind of count Yokozuna into that factor. But
he's actually not Japanese born, so that's storyline only.
Yeah, but no, I think the build has been poor because it's so hard to do with two faces. It's like, hey, I respect you. Hey, I respect you. And then when Nakamura is watching AJ in a match, it's like, okay, I'm going to watch you in a match. You're going to get beat down. I'm going to save you. And then when Nakamura's in a match, it's, hey, I'm going to win this match. I'm going to get beat down. You're going to come up and try to act like you're going to save me, but I'm really just going to save myself. It's been nothing but, I just think, a weak build-up, but the quality that they're going to put on in this main event for SmackDown at WrestleMania, I think, is going to be well beyond what people have seen. This has the making of being a very rare Dave Meltzer 5-star matchup right here.
So the other question with the build-up is AJ has been, I would say, adequate on the mic in his WWE run. I don't think he's been good, but I think he's been good enough. Nakamura has talked almost every single week, and I would prefer to book him where he doesn't talk very much. He has fewer lines, but they have more impact in that case. He struggles. He's gotten better. He's certainly better than Asuka is on Raw, but because of the language barrier, it seems as though when he's talking, trying to build this up, instead of using his actions, he's using his words. It seems to lose effect on the audience. And a lot of times he's saying stuff, I believe, SmackDown was just in our hometown of Pittsburgh. The big send-off in his exchange verbally was that Nakamura said that AJ is too emotional. That really didn't do it for me. That seemed like sort of a weak explanation for it. So is there lack of verbal abilities with AJ being decent but not great and Nakamura struggling in that regard? Is that really hindered what they could do?
I would say a little bit. I think AJ has the mic skills, but they're kind of limiting him. And I don't think AJ has that free reign on the mic yet that some guys do. And Nakamura, I agree with it, though, allowing him to be on the mic week in and week out, because he's only going to get better the more mic time that he has. So I would say the best case scenario is kind of getting Shinsuke maybe like a manager off to the side.
That's sort of what I was going to... When you go back in wrestling history, if you had a great talent in the ring who couldn't speak well, they didn't try to hope that person would suddenly get better. They sort of limited their ability to speak or their options and opportunities to speak in favor of maybe utilizing a manager, or like I said, sometimes you have a guy that just doesn't have to talk a lot for his actions to speak for him. I think that in this case, it's almost like Nakamura has sort of hurt his cause by, and I don't think it's his fault. I think the fact that they have him talking considerable amounts every single week has sort of made it hard on him to come across in the same formidable. Would you agree, going back, that probably the best he ever looked in this company was his first ever NXT match against Sami Zayn? Is that sort of that's the standard? And to me, he did that because there was a mystery around him. He didn't have to say anything. He just came out there and he worked his style, and there wasn't anything about him setting up the match with his words. It was sort of just with his wrestling ability that allowed that match to have a great build and to culminate with that.
I would agree with that just because, I mean, I knew who Shinsuke Nakamura was from watching New Japan, and I remember one of our possible co-hosts here in the future, Kyle Dawson, I watched that pay-per-view with him a couple years ago, and he was like, who is this dude? He's like really weird and everything. I'm like, just wait until you watch him in the ring. And he had that mystique to him. For those who don't watch New Japan, for those who maybe heard the name but never saw a match.
Right, I was in that same boat where I knew about him. I think I maybe seen him once or twice in Ring of Honor on their TV, but not to the point where I'd never watched a New Japan match of his. So there was like that unknown.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's sort of gone now. And that's going to happen just over time when a guy's been with the company for a couple years. But it seems like the more he's forced to talk and be in those situations, it sort of takes away from maybe some of the other aspects that he came to the North America with.
Well, you know, WWE has their want and will for talking champions, being good on the mic and everything. And you can get away with the exception of Brock Lesnar with having Paul Heyman by his side. It's been a thing since back in 2002 when Brock became a part of WWE. He had Paul by his side. Paul has always been Brock's mouth because I honestly think Brock Lesnar is worse than Shinsuke Nakamura on the mic. And it's something I kind of like it just because he needs to form that language. He needs to get better with his English, and the only way he's going to get better is getting more time on the mic and growing his skills. Maybe do a little more in the background. Maybe, like I said, get a manager in, have them talk for him, and then in the back he can work promos in the back. Something like that, but I think it's something that needed to be done to get him into the style of using the English language on a more consistent basis.
So we've highlighted the two championship, the Universal and the WWE Championship matches. There's 5 or 6 other marquee matches that are at least in the realm of main event. So we'll sort of run through which of those matches has been built correctly and has accentuated it and really allowed the audience to get behind it, and which one of them have fallen short. The first thing that I think of are the women's matches, and there's really 3 matches when you include the mixed one that fall under this category. So let's first talk about the one that's drawing the most attention. That's the Kurt Angle, Ronda Rousey versus Triple H and Stephanie. I think the plan all along was Triple H and Stephanie were going to be involved with Ronda Rousey, whether she ever signed full-time or did a one-time thing. This ultimately was going to be what they wanted from years ago. So in a sense, it's something where there is history dating back to, what was that, 3 WrestleManias ago? It was a while ago.
30.
Yes. So this is something that I think they've wanted, and probably in the back of their mind, this was always the plan. Now, Kurt Angle seems like he probably was a bit of a late addition to this. I know that a lot of people were hoping The Rock would be with Ronda. That would have obviously made the match just light years ahead of where it is now. I actually threw the idea out, and I've seen some other people say it, so I don't want to take full credit for it, but I thought Batista would have been an option to be the partner as well, because he had built-in history with Triple H. He also has the Hollywood aspect where if you pair Ronda with someone from Hollywood, it sort of makes sense. Plus, if nothing else, you'd be bringing back another star to the company. Batista did not go out on the best, terms in how he was presented. He had sort of a mediocre, disappointing run, so I don't know if he has any interest in coming back. But they ultimately settle on Kurt Angle, and Kurt and Triple H have great history dating back to basically Kurt Angle's first real feud in the company. They haven't really touched on that as much. They've made this obviously more about Ronda against Stephanie, Ronda against Triple H. But when you talked about the issues that Nakamura has had with some of his promos, Ronda has struggled mightily at times. Kurt Angle, who I think was very good in his prime on the mic, is not anymore. He stumbles. He makes a lot of mistakes. So you have one half of this equation not really doing a great job on the mic to set it up. And then when the actual match comes, you're probably going to have 3 people who are nowhere near their top abilities in Ronda wrestling her first match, Stephanie, who is not a full-time performer by any means, and Kurt Angle, who has been ravaged by injuries and is well past his prime. Triple H is the only person I can comfortably say will be performing at a high level in that match. Does that make it a recipe for disaster, how everything's worked out so far?
No, I don't think so. Just because you're going to get the excitement factor. I think the excitement factor is going to take over the minds of people from viewing it as a possible just abomination. Stephanie has the in-ring ability. Don't get me wrong. I mean, she's been there for what, 20 years now. She has the in-ring ability. It's a matter of and the way this match is going to work best is how well do Stephanie and Triple H carry the match. This is one of those matches where you have to have those two lead the match, carry the match. Kurt, he hasn't had the in-ring as much. He had that one match as a special member of the Shield, which
was extremely awkward, by the way. I loved it because it was great to see him back there, but the whole thing seemed like, to your point earlier, a decision they made, 48 hours in advance with Roman getting pulled out of that match. So it was...
And he also had, to go into the back to get, an oxygen break 15 minutes into the match. And that actually was a very planned spot, which is sad. But, I don't know. I think this has been one of the better built matches just because they added Ronda to the recipe, so they didn't need to focus on the past between Triple H and Kurt Angle. A lot of people have already known about that past between the two, so you don't need to focus on that. You need to more focus on the Ronda Rousey factor and bringing her in. And I think the job that was done at the contract signing was a fantastic play on this build, and I think it was one of the best built pieces of any matches, just because you knew you weren't going to get The Rock just because the insurance policy to get The Rock in to wrestle with the Hollywood contract is just beyond astronomical, the price. And Shane McMahon didn't fit in, and they talked about using him. I thought Braun Strowman would have fit in well in this match, but yet again, you're not going to, you see what Braun does to most guys on a daily basis, including your good friend Elias there. You can't take it seriously just because Braun would squash Triple H like he squashes everybody else.
Right.
So you had to get somebody in the ring that is to an equal level of Triple H, and that's what Kurt Angle is. And Kurt Angle's job that he did in that promo was fantastic. Just, Kurt's sick, he's just saying stuff, and then he throws out the little bits of oh yeah, remember when you were in the back and you said, yeah, now we finally get her back and now we own the bitch. And it's it was perfect. Kurt played a perfect part in this. And I think that was some of Kurt's best work since he's been back in the WWE, was setting up this feud and getting these parties together.
So your take is the match will be good enough. They just have to set up the right spots. It's not probably going to be a 20-minute classic, but they'll have all sorts of... It'll be very significantly booked, but you think that can work in this scenario?
I think if you can give Triple H and Kurt Angle 10 to 15 minutes of solid in-ring time, and you give Ronda about 7 to 10 minutes with Stephanie McMahon to build on her growth as a performer in entertainment now as compared to the UFC, I think you have a chance to have maybe about a 3.5-star match. That's about as high as I would possibly say this one can go. But as you alluded to get things rolling with Ronda Rousey, she does need to do a lot of work on the mic. But that's not something she's ever needed to do. In UFC, you don't have to be good on the mic. You just basically have to sit there at a press conference and yell at the other person and tell them you're going to beat the living hell out of them. That's all it is in the UFC. And UFC builds are completely different than WWE. She has a lot of growth to do, which is why I think she should have gone to NXT to start out, like they do with a lot of other talent, but
including her friend Shayna Baszler.
Yeah, but Shayna Baszler's name isn't Ronda Rousey.
Right.
And everybody knows who Ronda Rousey is. Everybody knows what she accomplished in the Olympics, what she accomplished in the UFC. So that's the only reason why she's on the main roster already, is because of who she is and what her name is. She could, and I would like to see maybe if after this match, if things are a little shaky, maybe she does take a trip down to NXT and maybe starts a feud with Shayna Baszler, who I think is probably going to end up being the NXT Women's Champion. Maybe give her a run with that title, let her grow as a wrestler, and then bring her up and do your planned Asuka, Ronda, Charlotte, Ronda match next year at WrestleMania.
Interesting that you segued perfectly to the next thing. I think the Asuka Charlotte match is going to be really good, and they didn't really need a whole lot of storyline behind that. It was a pretty easy setup. Asuka won the Royal Rumble, the first ever for the women, and she could pick either side. And I like that they sort of faked out that she was going to Raw. I always thought she was going to pick Charlotte because it just, in terms of the caliber of competition, it just made more sense. So I think that match sets up perfectly. I'm very happy with how that's unfolded. And, again, I don't want Asuka talking. I think she could do enough without talking to set up this match and sort of have Charlotte do the majority of the talking. But the match itself will certainly deliver. My question more so is on the other side. I'm a gigantic Alexa Bliss fan, as you know. I think she's done a decent job as a champion. I think the issue more so is they haven't booked her very well. She just hasn't been very involved with a lot of stuff. She hasn't defended the title that much. She really, I don't think, comes across as a very formidable champion, which I understand she sort of has to be the cowardly type of heel. But this match against Nia Jax, to me, it doesn't feel like a big-time match because I think it's almost overshadowed by Bayley and Sasha, which is seemingly not going to be a WrestleMania match. So are you okay with Nia and Alexa being a marquee match for the title?
I think I agree with you on the account that Charlotte versus Asuka has been a better built match, but I think Alexa Bliss might have the best mic skills of any woman on the roster.
I think that's clear as day that she's the best. I don't even think it's close, to be honest.
But I don't like the way they set things up. I think they waited too long in having Asuka say she was going to challenge Charlotte, and then it put this poor build together with Alexa and Nia, just because, Nia and Alexa were inseparable for the past how many months, and then all of a sudden now Alexa's back being friends with Mickie James, and then she's talking smack on Nia in the back with Mickie James, and I think the build for that match has been extremely poor. The
whole thing with her and Mickie, they never explained why they became friends again right after they had their own feud.
Yeah, and I don't think you can take the title off Alexa Bliss. I don't think Nia Jax is yet ready to be a champion. You're putting Alexa Bliss into a title match against someone who hasn't even been one of the more relevant women in the women's division.
Well, that's a really good point, because when you look at Nia, and I understand you said things changed, she looked destined to be in an Enzo Amore storyline. Yeah, and she was not this. Yeah, she sort of got away from being this dominant, just bulldozer of a competitor. She wasn't featured for long periods of time. Maybe she would have a squash match here and there, but generally she wasn't. It's not like she's always been this dominant force on the main roster. So they've sort of been hot and cold with her, and now they decide, well, we're going to make her challenge, and for some reason we're going to have to make her and Alexa split up, but we don't really have a good reason behind it.
I think the best case scenario for this is, I think you have to find a way to keep Alexa Bliss with the title, because there's already so many matches in which you're going to see potential title changes, and I can't see them changing every title. I mean, you're more than you're going to see the two, I think, world championships change. I wouldn't be surprised if your mid-card titles change, and at least one of the tag team championships and the SmackDown Women's Championship. So I would think this is that one match in the championship cards that has to stay with Alexa Bliss, and I think this is where Ember Moon makes her debut on Monday night after WrestleMania, and then the ball gets rolling with Ember Moon and Alexa Bliss.
So we've got the title matches, the main event title matches, and the women's matches covered. I don't want to spend too much time because the plan next week is to sort of do a match-by-match breakdown of predictions. But it seems like some of the matches we haven't touched on yet are the ones where the build has not been very good. Yeah. The Braun Strowman, to me, seemed like a guy for the past 8 months they've been building to be in a massive match at WrestleMania. That's not the case. And taking nothing away from the Bar, who I think do a great job, this does not feel like a big match. And I don't care who his partner ends up being, and there's certainly a lot of rumors surrounding it. Braun should have been in a bigger match than this, based on what he had done over the months. I thought that there was 2 logical scenarios for him, even as recently as a month ago, either finding his way into the Universal title match as part of a triple threat or against The Undertaker. They're not doing either of those matches for him. So is it ultimately the company dropping the ball with Braun Strowman here? Even though this match might be entertaining, it seems like it's well below where he should be.
I think it's a way of putting a title on him before he just gets thrown into the world title scene. I mean, if you date back, you go all the way back. When do you remember the last time somebody just came in and was an instant world champion? The last time was probably Brock Lesnar back in 2002 when he beat The Rock at SummerSlam. WWE just has this thing where they like their champions to have previous titles and build them up and then, put the main strap on them. I mean, Braun, his in-ring ability for his size is fantastic.
And that's something I don't think you would say when he came up. I was not a fan of him when he was with the Wyatts. And I thought that he looked overwhelmed. But since they pressed the restart button, I think he's grown considerably in every aspect. Yeah, and the only thing is, though, too, is you have to... But then, if you think about it too, if you were to put him in the World Championship match, you're running into the situation again where you have Brock Lesnar. He's had the title for the year. He's this, indestructible, unbeatable person. But I mean, Braun Strowman destroys everybody in his path. So you have to have somebody win the title before him, because if he was to join that triple threat, in all likelihood he would end up winning, but then you have nobody that is really capable of handling him anyway. And you're still running into the same situation where you're getting Braun versus Roman, because Roman's really the only person that they've ever shown that has a chance to beat Braun in general. I thought the best case scenario for Braun to begin with was to go after the Intercontinental title with The Miz, going off of what happened in the pay-per-views at the end of last year, where The Miz and the Miztourage all threw him into the back of a dumpster, but it's kind of like he just pushed that whole thing with The Miz to the wayside almost. Do you see a scenario, I guess I should rephrase this. Are you looking forward to seeing who his partner is, or would you rather almost have had him do it 1-on-2? Because to me, that gets him more over if he does it solely by himself, because that's something that you don't see. That makes it unique. I thought that would have been the best bet, but now even if they pick a Mysterio or a Neville, which would be cool to have those guys back, it just seems like it's going to take away from what Braun does by having a partner. I think your best case scenario, I think the 1-on-2 would have been awesome, and him holding both tag team championships himself. Right, because then he stands out as being different. But I think
and your shirt says it right now. I think the best case scenario would be for Elias to be his tag partner, because not only do you put a title on Braun, who has been an up-and-comer young guy in the business on the main roster, you would put the other tag title on another young up-and-comer in the business on the main roster, and it allows the two of them to grow together and make that push towards mid-card champion, world champion status. I think that's the best case scenario, is putting him with another younger rostered guy rather than with a Mysterio, because I just think that would be it's just a random team. And Braun doesn't have that factor to where it's like, why would Braun Strowman be bringing back a 5'7" cruiserweight to be his partner? Like, that's not Braun's place to bring back Rey Mysterio, in my mind. He's not that type of person where he has to call the previous era to beat Sheamus and Cesaro.
Right. So we've went over a lot of the matches that are already set for WrestleMania. There's still some business to take care of on these next two shows, on Raw and SmackDown this week. The big one is, of course, Cena and what seemingly will be The Undertaker as his opponent at WrestleMania. They've had this sort of, as I think, a weird approach to this storyline, where Cena's last resort is to get The Undertaker. Shouldn't that be like almost his priority? Shouldn't that be the first thing he went for? But now he's trying to settle for The Undertaker, and we haven't seen him, which I'm okay with The Undertaker not appearing. But the question is, what do they do this week to make this match seem real significant? Because I don't think they've done it yet to this point. And what do they do at WrestleMania to make sure the match doesn't flop?
I think the coolest thing that could possibly happen, and what would make this match light years better than it really was, is scrap the dead man Undertaker and bring him back as the American Badass and roll with it like that. I think that would be the best case scenario for this match.
So I got a couple questions off of that, because I think that there's a lot of people that have said that. It makes sense in terms of they had him sort of retire the hat and the coat and everything. So that part of him seemingly was retired. And I think at the time the plan was he was retiring after last year, and maybe they've rethought that. I don't know what the plan was all along, and maybe a lot of the people in the company don't know either, but that's one way to sort of save face with him retiring that last year, saying, all right, well, it's a different Undertaker.
I don't think he ever retired. I really don't. I think in the way John Cena has handled this whole thing, and if you look at Cena's Instagram posting like the Texas Red pictures and all this stuff, excuse me, getting ready for this match, it's almost like they knew he wasn't done. They knew he had one more WrestleMania in him, but the mystique of the dead man kind of lost its touch now that he is 22-2 at WrestleMania.
Right.
Losing to Roman, I think, kind of killed the whole dead man factor, and I think this is the perfect time to bring him back as that American Badass, that person who he is in real life. Because it's one thing my dad and I have always talked about is he's gonna be in the Hall of Fame. And he's gonna be the main focal point of the Hall of Fame when he gets in.
Probably next year, as early as
next year, maybe 2 years. But you're not gonna have him come out as the dead man and do his shtick, because when you do your Hall of Fame ceremonies, you are who you are in real life. And that's who he is in real life. So I would love to see it as a retirement of the thing. But yet again, at Raw 25, he came out with that, dead man thing. So,
well, so you said you want to see the biker Undertaker with the the old music and everything. Do you show that this Monday, or do you have him again not appear. Let me say this. How do you book this match at WrestleMania? What do you do on Monday night to make it where people, you have to establish that the match is happening, right? I mean, they have to get that done on Monday, I would think. So how do they go from where they're at right now with the match not even set, and now you're a week away from the event? How do they set the match, and how do they make it so that people tune in?
My way to do it is to have it go through Kane.
Okay.
I don't think you need to have Undertaker there. Cena beating Kane in that no DQ match on Monday night. I think Kane comes out and delivers the message for the Undertaker, kind of like a "you got through me" thing. So now you get him, and that's how you build it. Because then you are left with that thought of, what Undertaker are we getting? Are we getting?
So you want Kane to set the match, but not allude to the dead man is done, but you'll get another side of the Undertaker?
Yeah, basically, you got through me, and now he wants you.
But you don't want to tip your hat as to what Undertaker, what version we'll see. You want that to be a surprise.
Sadly, I think we're going to get the same old Undertaker.
I would agree with that as well.
But yet again, if you look back on past history, and the reason I think it's going to be is because the last time Cena and Undertaker ever met in a match, that was his character, the American Badass. John Cena has never faced the Dead Man. So that's the reason why I think it's going to be the Dead Man. But I would love to see them go back and make the parallel to when they first met back in 2003, when Cena was just coming up, and, have those two battle it out for, one last ride. And I think the best way, a little pun there, the last ride, but I think the best build for this match would be a career versus retirement match, or retirement versus retirement.
Right.
Whether it's, if Cena loses, he's done with WWE, or if Undertaker loses, he retires. I think that
would add to it a lot. My problem is, it almost seems like it's too late to add this now, unless you have the Undertaker come to Raw to say that. Because just having Cena say it, or having Kane say it, it loses some of its appeal if not both combatants are there face to face to agree to it.
I don't think you need to, though, because they didn't need it when it was Undertaker and Shawn Michaels, when it was career versus the streak. It was more so just Shawn Michaels saying, if I can't beat the Undertaker, then my career is over. And Taker just accepted the match. He didn't have to say anything. So I don't think you need, especially with the caliber of opponent of it being John Cena, I don't think you need the Undertaker there to build that. I think you can more get away with Kane coming out and, basically giving out the match, and then Cena going along and saying, well, you know what? If I can't beat him, then my career's over. But if I do beat him, maybe it is his time to retire.
Okay, I could see that. Before we wrap things up here, is there anything that the WWE needs to wrap up between Raw and SmackDown this week to really put the finishing touches on WrestleMania? Again, I go back to my take that at this point it's kind of tough. You're sort of rushing if you still need to develop storylines or things of that nature. It's the go-home show, so I expect both of them to have some good interaction. But to me, I think the bigger issue with the build started 2 to 3 months ago. These are matches that should have been brewing. The one thing that I go back to is Sasha and Bayley right now, I think is great. I think that has been building for months and months, and you can even go back years. They had probably the best feud that I've ever seen two women have in WWE programming, now albeit in NXT. For them to just at the last minute, last Monday, really go to blows and likely not even have a one-on-one match at WrestleMania is just a disservice to them. They're going to be probably stuck in that battle royal where it'll get completely lost.
Well,
and they'll
already
have
are.
their own. They'll have their own one-on-one match at the next event where it won't have any significance, or at least it won't have nearly the significance of WrestleMania. That to me is something that I wish on Monday they could make that into its own match. I don't expect that to happen, and I think it'll be really a miscarriage of justice for both of them who deserve more and could have.
They're already on the card for that battle royal.
Right, and I think it. So why are you even doing this then? Why even start them feuding right now before WrestleMania where it's just going to get lost? That to me is one of the biggest, because the battle royals, no matter how much they try to build them up, people understand they don't really matter at this point. They are probably the least anticipated of the WrestleMania matches would be those two battle royals.
Yeah, I would completely agree. I think for Monday Night Raw, I would like to see that who Braun's partner is going to be. I don't think you want to wait until WrestleMania. I just think that, if you get Mysterio, it's going to be a pop, but other than that, it's just kind of like, okay, well, it's this 6'10", 350-pound dude that runs around like, a bulldozer again, and this little 5'8" guy against, two, decorated athletes. But I think the best thing would be to determine Braun's partner. Maybe Cesaro and Sheamus, find a way again to get it out of him, and they do this time. And I also think you need to figure out what you're going to do with The Undertaker and Cena and how you're going to plan that. Yet again, we could even get it to where Cena comes out at WrestleMania and The Undertaker doesn't answer until then. He just comes out at WrestleMania. So I think those are things that you have to, I think Raw has to finish up on. I think Raw needs to touch base a little bit more on this whole Nia and Alexa Bliss story. And for SmackDown, I'm
thinking Daniel Bryan and Shane's going to be interesting because we don't know what Shane's status in real life is.
That, and I also think that with the stipulation that was put on the match, it has already given away who is going to win this match. Unless they make a point of keeping them fired and then whoever takes over as SmackDown GM, with Daniel now being a competitor again, reinstates them, or Kurt Angle brings them to Monday Night Raw, something along those lines.
Do you want to see Kevin and Sami this week, or do they still play out the suspension thing?
I think you need Daniel Bryan to get the payback on Sami Zayn and Kevin Owens to make it seem as if you don't know who's going to win this match. Because with the stipulation, it pretty much clear and cut dry says Kevin and Sami are winning this match, just based off the stipulation.
Right.
I think Daniel Bryan should come out and put his general managership on the line in the match as well.
That's what I thought might happen. Right.
So I think that's the best play on that, because it's either reinstatement versus, the GM job. And I want to know what's going on with these tag titles in SmackDown. It's just been a month of the Bludgeon Brothers just destroying people. And are they going to continue to do that? Are they going to win the SmackDown titles? And the U.S. title, I think, is the biggest joke of this whole thing.
Yeah, it seems like they just threw the guys that they didn't have anything for together.
Well, yeah, it was like Randy Orton won it, and we knew it was going to happen just because of the, making sure he held every title in his career. But then Bobby Roode is an understandable competitor, and then Jinder Mahal gets thrown into the hat, and then Rusev gets joined in. Well, you beat him, he beat me, and I beat you, so we're all going to be in this match together.
Yeah, it seems like they have that's one that they had four guys where, okay, we need to get them on the card. Let's do that instead of throw them in the Battle Royal.
Yeah, so I think they're trying to compact too much. I was reading, I guess, from the pre-show till the end. They're saying this has a chance to go 7 hours.
Well, yeah, I think it did last year, if I'm correct on that. I believe that it started at 5 and it ended after midnight.
Yeah, and I mean, the 2-hour pre-show, I think, is just a little absurd. I mean, you have to have all the titles on the line. I mean, I understand you're trying to compact as many people into this as you possibly can, but I think it loses the value of what WrestleMania used to be.
Where not everyone gets a match. If you don't have a good year and you're not deserving, you don't just get thrown in there.
Yeah, it used to be, we're going to put the best people against each other, and we're going to put on the best show that we possibly can. Now it's just, because they always talk about WrestleMania moments. You have to earn your way to WrestleMania. Well, it's like, oh, well, you're not in a match. You go to a Battle Royal, and you go to a Battle Royal, and here's a WrestleMania match for you. And it's like, basically, if you're just on the main roster and you're a part of the company, you're in WrestleMania.
Yeah, well, that's something that we'll see what they do this week to kind of put the finishing touches on this show. Well, that's going to do it for our first show. So hopefully the first of many. And like I said, I do want to either get you back or get our potential co-hosts of the future, Kyle Dawson, Donnie Chedrick. We'll have some other special guests as well. Next week, we'll be doing the WrestleMania preview show with predictions. And then, of course, the following week, we'll do the WrestleMania recap. So, Sean, I appreciate you joining us. Certainly a good time talking to you. Went longer than expected, but that's what happens when you have two people interested in talking about pro wrestling. So
that was fun. I'm looking forward to next week. I already got half my predictions down. So
there we go. All right. Well, we appreciate it. So for my broadcast colleague, Sean Saputo, this is Sean Meyers signing off. Once again, you've been watching the 5-Star Podcast of Wrestling. Check back next week.